Fantastic. So for today, what we'll be focusing on is really thinking through the various opportunities that students have when thinking through their colleges, specifically with the focus on selecting the right application round and how that might form part of a strategy that students and families can utilize when thinking through the colleges that they'll be applying to over the next few years. And again, this work actually starts a lot earlier than your final year of high school. So we invite parents and students of all ages in high school to really start thinking about which application round might be the best for you. So, a quick introduction. My name is Dexter Padayachee, and I served as the head of university guidance for Sesameed. Over the past year, we've been building a fantastic curriculum that leverages a lot of my experience over the past decade as an educator, both on the university side as well as a college counselor in various settings from South Africa to China and beyond. So without further ado, I think that it's really important for us to think about what we'll be focusing on for today's webinar. We'll start off by working through some of the definitions of the various application rounds, which include early decision, early action, restricted early action, regular decision. And for the most part, those are just definitions that serve as a guidepost when thinking through when a student should be applying to universities and what type of universities they should be applying to within the various rounds. However, the main focus of today's webinar is actually to move beyond the definitions. And we'll be looking at a few case studies just to think about how students have approached this particular process in the past. And hopefully, it is going to be useful information for you to utilize as you begin navigating this process with your children, or if you are a student, as you begin to think about the types of universities that you'll be applying to. What we hope for you to leave with after this webinar are certain key strategic questions that you may ask as you are navigating the application process. We'll also talk about the role of demonstrated interest. And if this is a new term to you, don't fret. We will be going through what demonstrated interest is and how you can demonstrate your interest to a university. We'll also touch on some pitfalls to avoid and then discuss the application strategy planner. Really thinking through how you can leverage the different rounds in order to make a sound decision when deciding on which application round to apply, which universities to apply to within those application rounds, etc. So, brief outline. Typically, what we have is early decision, which is a binding application within the specific to US universities. In addition to that, there's early action. Typically speaking, students can apply to 2 to 3 universities within early action. And then finally, regular decision, which is the most common round. So we have the bulk of applications typically received or sent within the regular decision round. And this is typically around January of your senior year in high school. Something to just keep in mind is that there are some other options, as I mentioned previously, restricted early action. And in addition to that, there's also rolling admission. Rolling admission means that once the application opens, students can apply at various intervals, and they will receive the outcome of the application at various intervals as well. Whereas for some of these application rounds, it's a little bit more structured, and we'll go into the detail. So, some things to note about early decision. It is a binding application. And what we mean by binding is that if you apply within the early decision round, you are saying that I commit to the university. Both student and parent will sign something called an ED agreement, so an early decision agreement. And it serves as somewhat of a legal document that you, as a student and a parent, will sign to say that if I am admitted to this particular university, I am going to enroll. It is ideal for students with a clear first choice school. And what this means is that regardless of any other outcome within the application, regardless of any other application outside of the US that you might be applying to, this particular school is your number one choice. And so with that comes a lot of responsibility because both as student and parent, you'll need to think about whether this is the right fit school for your child or for you as an applicant. In addition to that, you can only apply to one early decision school. And basically, what you're saying to this school is that you are saying, you are my one and only. I am committing to you fully. If you accept me, I will come without asking any questions, so to say. The typical deadline for early decision is November 1. However, we are seeing that more and more schools are shifting that deadline. And so some schools are accepting early decision applications by November 15th. So there's some flexibility with it. And what's really important to keep in mind, I'm actually going to jump into the cons really quickly. It's so important that your application should be ready by November. This means that as an applicant, you have a shorter window within which to prepare your application. Typically speaking, students will start their early applications in June or July, so during the summer, so that by the time that the application is due, come November 1 or November 15, the application has gone through various iterations where the essay is improved over time. A student is really taking the time to also research the university. And so within this particular application round, it can be stressful at times. So this is something to always keep in mind if you are considering early decision. It may seem as though November is a far away deadline, but having worked with students for over a decade now, and I'm sure that some of my colleagues will agree, the deadline comes much sooner than anticipated. It's so important for students to really think through the various components of the application. Have you done the interview? Are you happy with the personal statement? Have you completed all of the supplementary essays that are required as part of the applications too? Are you demonstrating your interest, right? So those are key questions that one should ask themselves. And again, this November deadline does come quicker than anticipated. However, there are various pros to applying early decision. Most universities will have a higher acceptance rate in early decision versus regular decision. What we've seen in certain instances, and of course this changes year on year, is that some universities will have a 25% acceptance rate in early decision, and that drops drastically to an overall admission or acceptance rate of 12% or 7%. And so it's important to think about what is the best strategy for you to get into your most prized university or school that you'd like to go to. The other pro is that the application process ends early, so students do typically feel less stress. Personally, as a counselor, I always encourage students and families to consider early decision or early action so that once you get over the hurdle of submitting that first application, the subsequent applications become a lot easier to manage. And also, you are able to overcome that hurdle of hesitation, of anxiety once you hit that submit button. As I mentioned earlier as well, there's also demonstrated interest. With early decision, you are saying to a university, I am committing to you. I'm not interested in looking at anything else that any other university has to offer. What you have is what I'm looking for. And I think that we would match really well together as a student and a university. And there are, of course, some cons. Perhaps if you are a student thinking about applying early decision, but you'd really rather go to a school that only offers early action. If you are admitted in early decision, you cannot take the early action offer if you were to get it too. So you must attend if accepted. So there's no opportunity to compare the various offers. And if, for example, you're thinking about financial aid, you won't be able to compare an offer from early action with financial aid versus early decision with financial aid because you have signed an agreement that you will attend the university if you are accepted. So that's really important to keep in mind. And now we move into something that is a lot more flexible, which is early action. With early action, it is non-binding. The great thing about this is that you receive your decision quite early, typically within December or early January if you're applying on November 1 or November 15th. But the great thing is that you don't need to commit to the school immediately. With early action, you could leave it until May. That's when most universities will have their overall enrollment and decision making. But for early action, you know that you are in, or you've been accepted to a school by December with that flexibility to then perhaps be a little bit more courageous or ambitious in the application rounds that follow. The other thing is that early action, you can apply to multiple different schools that offer early action rounds. My typical advice would be to stick between two and three applications. You want to ensure that the quality of the application is really strong. And so it doesn't mean that because a school offers early action that you should apply. Strategically, as a student, you also want to think about how your senior year will be unfolding. Perhaps junior year was a strong year, but not the best year for you. And there are other parts that you'd really like to strengthen. Let's say, for example, your leadership. And by taking the time to really focus on developing that leadership role within the first 6 months of your senior year, it might be a great idea to then not apply early action. So the main point here is that because early action exists and a school offers it, it doesn't mean that you necessarily need to apply. Unless you are very confident in your choice, it also gives you the peace of mind that if you were to receive a positive outcome from early action, you know that you have a secured pathway moving forward. So some of the pros, just really quickly, is that it's non-binding, which means more flexibility. Results come in earlier, which reduces stress. And then the final one is that it's just a strategic advantage without any obligation to attend that particular university. The cons is that typically speaking, early action admissions are not as high as early decision. Some schools may also defer applicants from the early action round into the regular decision round. And some universities do this because they would like to see how a student is performing within their final year of high school. Another reason might be that they would like to receive more applications from applicants from your country or your region. And the main thing is that even though it's an early application, it's going to require the same amount of work that early decision will in most cases. So that's really important to keep in mind. The main takeaway from this particular slide is that you need to be thinking through the strategy when applying early action too. It's not just a case that a school offers it and therefore you should apply. Rather, just think through what is going to be the best model for you as a student and what's going to highlight your strengths and abilities. We then move into restricted early action. So it's non-binding like early action. However, most restricted early actions will have certain limits on what other universities you can apply to. So, for example, if you're applying restricted early action, you cannot apply early decision and you cannot apply early action to other private universities. There are some exceptions with this. And so this is where I'd say that the role of a counselor really comes into play. They would be able to guide you as a family through which restricted early action options make the most sense for you when considering the entire school list. And a lot of these decisions should not be made within a vacuum. You should be thinking about what is the entire application strategy and how can I leverage this particular round to my advantage. I've just added some highly selective schools that offer REA, which are Stanford, Harvard, and Yale, amongst many others. This is ideal for strong applicants who really want early decision without the binding commitment. So, for example, you could apply REA to Stanford, but then also look at some top tier public research universities like Michigan or Wisconsin. And you could apply to those particular universities and receive all the outcomes before making the decision on which university you might attend. Some of the pros, as I've mentioned previously, it's non-binding. It also signals strong interest. Again, I'm going back to that idea of demonstrated interest and how that forms part of the strategy overall. It also provides an early result without limiting regular decision options. And so you still have the opportunity to apply to many different schools in RD. Some of the cons is that it might restrict an early strategy for other private research universities, or in certain instances, if a school doesn't offer early action and only ED, you won't be able to apply to both REA and ED. So that's something to keep in mind. And in addition to this, REA, there are a limited number of schools that offer this particular round. And so it's important to do your research and think about what is going to be the best option for you. And then finally, as we move along this sort of application rounds phase, we have regular decisions. So it's non-binding. That's something to note. Typically speaking, the applications will be due January 1st to January 15th. Some might be slightly later up until February 1st, but most of your top tier schools are going to have a deadline between January 1st and January 15th. Results will be released in March and April, and your final decision will need to be made by May. So I'm just going to take us a few steps back really quickly. Early decisions are typically released in December, and you need to make a firm choice and commit to the school if accepted in January. Early action, you'll receive the outcome typically in December, but you don't need to make a decision until May. Restricted early action, the decision will come out in December and you don't need to make an immediate decision. You can also make that decision in May, and the same thing applies for regular decision. So you'll apply in January and then you'll only make your decision after looking at the different acceptances that you've received, perhaps financial aid or scholarship packages, do additional research on the schools, and then you'll make an informed decision on which school is going to be the best fit for you. So some of the pros is that you do have a lot more time to prepare and polish an application. Typically speaking, students will utilize the December break in order to finalize their regular decision applications for submission in January. You also, again, have that option of reviewing the different offers that you might receive, and perhaps the school that you really want to go to had an early decision round, but your application wasn't ready, and so you can move that to regular decision. That's a really good strategy that I've seen students use in the past. Perhaps you wanted to boost your academic performance, and so you're waiting for that mid-year transcript in your senior year in order to apply. The cons, of course, is that it's a lot more competitive. You've had highly qualified students applying in early decision, applying in REA and EA. And so those slots are a lot more limited than in the earlier rounds. One example that we can look at is, let's say, for example, there's University X, and they've received 10,000 applications for 500 seats. And within the early round, they've already admitted, let's say, 350 students. And so now in the regular decision, they'll receive 20,000 applications, and they only have an additional 650 seats remaining. And so, as you can see, your chances become more slim the longer you wait. So results do arrive late, which is really challenging for some families, and it can be more stressful due to the volume and uncertainty. So regular decision is a highly competitive round, but at the same time, this does not mean that a student should not apply RD. As we move further into thinking through the different strategies that you can employ, I always recommend a combination, some combination of applying in the various rounds to ensure that you are hedging your bets the best way possible. So as we go through this and we start thinking about the different strategies that you can utilize as a family, some things to keep in mind is, do you have a clear first choice school you would attend if admitted? And this could be in the form of both an early decision because it's binding, or perhaps even an REA if you decide if you get into the restricted early action or the early action school, your application cycle can stop at that point if you're not interested in looking any further. Is your academic and extracurricular profile strong enough by October? And this is a critical question. We do find that many students take on leadership roles in their final year of high school. And so for some students, it might make sense to not apply too early. So maybe early decision, early action, and REA are not ideal rounds if they still need to boost their profiles, both academically and in terms of their extracurricular activities. Next question is, do you want to compare multiple offers before deciding? And this is a critical question because for some families, it might be that there's the first choice, and if you get in, that's it. For other families, they'd like to think about the different options that they might have. Perhaps finances then is a conversation that you'd like to have as a family on what is the best option. If it's not finances, then maybe thinking through where exactly you see your child going to, where they see themselves attending. Proximity to home might be a consideration too. So there are all of these different variables that you might want to consider. How many selective schools are on your list? And again, this is really important because your strategy will include some highly selective schools. In addition to that, it might be some more target schools, and those could be spread out in the various rounds that are offered. Do you prefer preferred schools offer ED, EA, or REA? Would applying early increase your chances significantly? And this would be in terms of doing some research on the admission rate in early decision versus the admission rate in regular decision. What is your timeline for finalizing essays? Have you taken the SAT or the ACT? Are you happy with your GPA? And then finally, are you ready to commit emotionally and logistically in November? Because there's a lot of information that as a student you'll be receiving, and as a parent guiding your child through this process can be stressful for you as well. It seems as though it should be a fairly straightforward process, but year on year, I engage with students and families who really feel exhausted after deciding on what is the best way to go, which schools to apply to early, which to leave for regular decision, the ability to really commit to a school logistically. Are you able to get all of the documents ready in time for the application? So these are all considerations that you should keep in mind. So one of the strategies that we could follow, which is keeping options open. So applying early action and RD gives you flexibility. It's ideal if you're still researching and visiting schools. Perhaps you've not spent a lot of time talking with your child about the various universities that they'd like to apply to. Perhaps they are still exploring different majors and career pathways. And so keeping that flexibility could be the best option for them. So an example of this could be applying early action to Northeastern University and then applying to slightly more competitive schools like Duke and Columbia in regular decision, amongst others. I'm just giving a few examples of universities that you can think about, but there are quite a number of universities that offer both early action as well as regular decision. Strategy two focuses on providing a lot more balance in the various rounds. So what you might want to do is apply to one early decision or restricted early action. Consider 2 to 3 early action schools. So you have your binding, you have your restricted, and then you have your early action, which is non-binding like restricted. And you can then also apply to several regular decision schools. This manages risk really well. I would oftentimes encourage students to think about their school list and the most desired or number one school that is still feasible, perhaps doing that early decision or restricted early action, focusing on target universities for early action, and then being a little bit more flexible and balanced in terms of both highly selective and target schools within regular decision. And this is really a balanced approach that students and families can use when selecting universities. Strategy three is using ED2. So we didn't talk about ED2, but this is another binding application that typically is due. I'd say some universities had it in December, so mid-December, but now they've typically moved to early January. So you might want to consider an early decision too. So this is the scenario. You've applied to ED1 and it didn't work out. However, in your list, there was a second school that was really close to that first ED. You might want to then apply to that particular university ED2. In a practical sense, let's say, for example, you've applied to Columbia University for ED1 and it didn't work out, and you are now going to try applying to Emory University for ED2 because it might offer a similar program or it might be a good fit for what you are looking for in a particular university. You can then apply ED2. That doesn't limit you from also applying early action and then finally regular decision. So it's really important to think about the different iterations and what the best game plan for your specific circumstance might be. So these are some additional questions when considering the universities itself and not just the logistics around it. Are you ready by November? For many students, they can be on a plan to be ready by November, but senior year is quite stressful as well. And sometimes you need to be flexible in your plan. Perhaps things didn't work out the way you intended. And so you might, even though you had an ED or an REA, you might want to then decide it's best to do it ED2 or regular decision if you're not ready. How sure are you of your top choice? And then finally, do you want that flexibility? So I'm going back to the same question around flexibility because I think that for many families, this is important as they consider the various options that they have in front of them. So, demonstrated interest. I think that early decision, early action, restricted early action, they have demonstrated interest built into it. You are saying to a school that I am ready to commit to you. I'm really interested, so I'm prioritizing your application over all of the other schools that I could apply to. I'm selecting you as my top choice. However, there are various ways that students should be focusing on prior to the application cycle. Engage early. Students should attend information sessions. If they do attend high school in the US and they have universities visiting, they should attend those info sessions. In addition to that, many universities visit various countries globally as well as offer online information sessions. I highly recommend that students leverage these opportunities to attend information sessions. It might seem as though it's not important, but I think it gives you a better sense of the university and what it has to offer beyond just doing research on the school's website. You get the opportunity to engage with an admissions officer. Again, this is an opportune moment for you to really stand out, to ask intelligent questions, and to make a lasting impression. Other ways that you can also engage is that if a school offers interviews, definitely schedule an interview. Make sure that you are prepared for an interview. Go through conversations with your counselor about how to best present yourself within these particular interviews, as well as your passions and your interests, and how you've come to articulate what your purpose is. This is what the interview really achieves because it gives the university a moment to reflect on who you are as an individual. And again, that personal connection can make a huge difference in an application. Some other ways is as a family, if you are planning to visit universities, think about which universities you are going to prioritize, perhaps visiting 2 to 3 universities over the summer or during a spring break might be a good use of your time. And the thing to note is that demonstrated interest sometimes matters more for some schools than others. Most schools are going to say that demonstrated interest is not important, but I always believe that the engagement really shows that as a student and as a family, you are doing your due diligence in order to research the school, the programs that they offer, and that you are committed to this process. It's not just about the application, it's an entire process that you're engaging in. So now we get into the fun bits. I love doing case studies specifically when thinking through options like the different application rounds. And so this is a brief case study. We'll go through three of them with varying outcomes. So this is a student from an international school in Singapore. They are currently doing the IB diploma. They have a 42 predicted score. In addition to that, they are the founder of the AI for Women Club. They've published articles in Student Tech Journal. They've also done summer research with a Stanford professor. The goal that the student has outlined for themselves is that they'd really like to attend a top tier research university with a strong computer science department. So clearly, you can now understand that this student is going into computer science, really interested in tech. Their extracurriculars show this huge commitment to thinking through technology, AI, computer science, data, STEM, generally speaking from a very intellectual way, but as well as a community impact when thinking through the AI for Women Club. The strategy that this student then employed is to apply to Stanford as restrictive early action. As you can tell, this is a great school, very close to Silicon Valley, lots of opportunities for internships, etc. And so what the student did was Stanford restrictive early action, and then RD options are open to demonstrate the various interest in Stanford, but at the same time gives that level of flexibility. She submitted high quality supplemental essays, good recommendations from mentors at her school, and maybe even beyond. For regular decision, she applied to quite competitive schools as well, which were MIT, Princeton, Carnegie Mellon, and Georgia Tech. Just want to go back to this really quickly. So again, you can see here highly selective schools, but at the same time, there is some variation. And this is not the complete list. There are likely at least another 5 universities on this list that shows that balance that I was speaking about earlier. For this particular student, they were admitted to Stanford in REA and then withdrew all of the RD applications because they were willing to commit and really eager to commit to Stanford. So what this offered is that the REA had a strategic advantage and it allowed this student to show commitment without losing flexibility. In addition to that, her focused summer and academic narrative strengthened the entire application narrative. And this is really important because Emily was able to showcase these particular skills and interests throughout her high school years. She had a very solid application in November, which meant that an REA was the right choice for her. So, similarly, we have a grade 12 student from Shanghai and they are currently doing an A-level curriculum, so a different type of curriculum, and the predicted are AAA star. So quite a strong prediction for Cambridge A levels. Debate team captain, they did a summer course at Columbia, strong humanities essays. The goal was Ivy League schools with a liberal arts focus and an urban campus. So that becomes really interesting, right? So definitely going to a top tier university, but wants to be in an urban environment with flexibility in the curriculum. So what made sense for this student was to apply ED to Columbia University. We have New York City, it's an urban environment. Definitely have a liberal arts focus in the curriculum with a spread of different disciplines that students have to complete. And in addition to that, it's an Ivy League. And they also built a complementary regular decision list that included U Chicago, Brown, Northwestern, NYU. And you can sort of draw a line to sort of connect the different offerings at these particular universities, what makes them similar, what makes them different, specifically where they are located too. The student also invested in ED supplements showing clear fit and demonstrated interest. So overall, this is a really strong application. So what happened in the outcome is that the student was deferred to the regular decision. Okay. So applied early decision to Columbia. Columbia said, we cannot make you an offer right now, but we think you are a strong student, so we'll reconsider your application in regular decision. However, the student was admitted to U Chicago and Northwestern, which they applied regular decision. So Columbia's ED helped the student capitalize on a strong fit and show commitment. ED worked best because he was confident that Columbia was his top choice. However, at the same time, noting that applying to university is so competitive right now, he decided that his RD strategy needs to be equally as strong. So he has some of those schools that are similar and perhaps as competitive as Columbia, and he was able to gain two acceptances to top universities. Okay, so this is where it didn't work out as planned, but at the same time, getting an offer from U Chicago and Northwestern, I don't think that any student would be disappointed with those outcomes. And so this is why it's important to really think about how you are managing the entire application strategy. So this is the, excuse me, final case study. So this is international student in Malaysia. They are doing a US high school curriculum, a 4.0 GPA, so a perfect GPA with a 1500 SAT. That is a really strong test score. Some extracurricular activities included national swimming champion, and the student also was a math tutor at a nonprofit. And so this is really showing leadership. It's showing innovation. It's showing initiative. It's showing commitment to the community and also excellence, both in the classroom as well as on the sports field. The goal for the student was that they wanted a large US university with a strong athletics program and a focus on engineering. And so you can sort of think about an engineering student. They were also a math tutor through this nonprofit that they founded. And so that becomes really important when thinking about engineering for impact, engineering for good. So some universities are going to be drawn to that. The student applied early action to the University of Michigan, and it's known for its strong engineering and athletics culture. They deliberately avoided ED and REA in order to keep that full flexibility because, again, this idea of a larger university, there are so many options. And RD, they focused on Georgia Tech, UC Berkeley, Purdue, and UT Austin. The outcome was that the student was admitted to the University of Michigan as well as Georgia Tech, and they chose Michigan for its campus culture and its athletic opportunities. So here you have a student comparing two different offers, one from early action, one from regular decision, and they then decided to choose the University of Michigan. So it allowed for peace of mind while thinking about the different options that they might have during regular decision, and it enabled the student to maximize applying to a strong state school without limiting anything that needed to come at a later stage. So as you can see, there's no one size fits all. It's really dependent on the student, their skills, their profile, where they are in terms of school research, and the type of support that they will be receiving throughout this entire process. Some pitfalls to avoid. And while it may seem that these are very easy to avoid, I've definitely seen some of this happen in real life where a student applies ED, but they're not fully committed. And so they then admitted to the school and they don't want to attend. That becomes a real big issue for universities, for schools, for parents, for students. And so you really want to avoid that. In addition to that, if a student isn't committed to applying ED, they can at times present subpar essays and supporting documents for applications. So you really need to be invested. It's a high stress moment. You're just getting into your senior year. You have a lot of schoolwork on your plate. You have examinations coming up. and it can be overwhelming. But with that level of commitment and support, a strong ecosystem, you can really be successful in early decision. One of the other pitfalls is waiting too long to decide. Um, in my 10 years of working in education, I can't recall how many times a student has come to me a few days before an application deadline and said, "Mr. Dexter, I'd really like to apply to the school early decision." And I sit there kind of stunned because I know that in order for the student to get this done, they need a personal statement, an activity list, and sometimes five supplemental essays. And so that's going to require a lot of work. And so it's rather best to sort of finalize the school list in June, July, so that you can plan ahead. And then finally, underestimating the competitiveness of top schools. I sometimes look at acceptance rates and I'm shocked. When I applied to university, for example, my college was quite competitive. It had about a 12% acceptance rate, and I think now it's currently on 9% acceptance. And while it doesn't seem too big, it's actually huge when you think about the volume of applications that these universities and colleges receive. And so always keep in mind that it's really competitive, and think about what is the best strategy and how to plan your applications in different stages to make the most of what is offered. Some of the advice that I would leave you with is to use a planner. Think about early decision. Have multiple schools in early decision at this moment in time, and then dwindle it down to schools that you believe, after doing research, are going to be the best fit for you. I highly recommend applying early decision for its showing demonstrated interest, and again thinking about the competitiveness and how that increases in regular decision. Definitely apply to early action. It's a great opportunity to secure a spot early in the application process. If you're not applying ED, then perhaps consider REA if that is what the school offers. And then for regular decision, have a blend of schools, both competitive, but also your target schools. And this will give you peace of mind as a family as you move along. It's also important to track the competitiveness of the schools that you are applying to, the fit, and develop a personal ranking. I know that there are great resources out there like US News, Times Higher Education, but I personally believe that those are just guidelines and, again, objective data in certain instances. But it's really important for a student to think about, what am I looking for in a university? And as a parent, guiding them through that process of discovery and developing a personal ranking that aligns with their values, their ambitions, their interests. I think that is really important. And then finally, start early to stay organized. Build the college list by June, research by July, finalize all of the ED and early action by September, and then focus on readiness, which includes essays, test scores, and engagement with schools. And I think that by combining these three elements, it's really going to set students up for success. And we are seeing that university admissions is getting more and more competitive each year. And these particular timelines are starting earlier in grade 11 sometimes. And so keep those communication channels open, because it is going to come in handy as you move along. So, final thoughts. What colleges want? They want students who've really thought about their application. So, strategic planning. Are you thinking about the schools you're selecting based on a simple numerical ranking? Or are you really focusing on what is going to be the best for you in terms of your major, in terms of your career goals and aspirations? Perhaps it's graduate school, perhaps it is going into the workforce directly. So, thinking about the programs offered and how it's going to prepare you for the next step is really important. Have a clear sense of fit. I personally did not know a lot about liberal arts colleges before applying to the US. And to be fair, if I had stayed in South Africa, I was going to study something like economics or accounting or medicine. So definitely within the STEM fields. However, I didn't realize that I loved the humanities. And so by taking this gamble and this risk, I went to a liberal arts college where I was pushed to think outside of my comfort zone. And I found a passion for the humanities. It worked out for me. But perhaps for some other students, they know very early on that they want to go into an engineering track, then some other schools are going to be a better fit for them. Think about the environment as well. I love intellectually engaging communities with my friends. I want to be able to debate and talk about politics and talk about all of these different things, about whether androids dream of electric sheep, to just quote a title of a book. So these are important things, and I got that at Amherst College for me personally. Whereas some students might want to go to class, engage in the academic learning process, but afterward want to spend time outside of class and not engage with anyone from the university. And so that would also determine the type of school that they attend. And then finally, readiness and maturity. I loved the fact that I went to a smaller school because there was a lot of support for me. If I were to attend a large state school, I don't know how much support I would have had. I've never experienced that, and so it would have been quite challenging for me to adjust to that. So, also in thinking about the readiness and the maturity of the student, that's going to come in handy moving forward. So, I think that at this point, I've shared a lot of information, and I will pause for any questions that anyone might have. Great. If there are no questions, Mint, I don't know. Do you see any questions coming up?
I have one. One second. Can do-it-yourself approach student really compete with student who have had years of guided coaching? And and if I do it use a DIY approach, what advice that I should take on building my profile and get me ready for the application?
Absolutely. That's a fantastic question. Many students, even if you're attending a top tier boarding school or a private school in your home country, an international school, one of the major challenges I think that come up for counselors, and this is speaking as a counselor at a school previously, is that there are so many students that we work with, and so it can be challenging to pay a lot of attention to a student when they're in grade 9, in grade 10, and the beginning of grade 11. College counseling for most schools, and I'm not speaking about all schools, but most schools, really begins at the midpoint of grade 11. That's when students start meeting with counselors, they start engaging, having conversations about how best to build a strategy, etc. And in my opinion, for some students, that can be a little bit too late. If you don't have someone guiding you from the beginning to find your purpose, to engage in activities that are going to help you develop concrete skills as well as soft skills. In addition to that, when it comes to academic planning, are you selecting courses that are opening and broadening your prospects, or are you selecting options that are going to close your prospects in the future? That becomes a really important and pivotal conversation. What I would share in terms of a do-it-yourself model is that students and parents should consider what the child has been doing over the past 2 years, regardless of which stage they're in. What have you done over the past 2 years? Reflect on that. Then take a moment to think about where are we moving to in terms of the future of work, in terms of processes and changes that are happening within the workforce. What are the skills that are emerging as the most important? I love reading reports from World Education Services, from The Economist, from McKinsey about the future of work. LinkedIn as well is a fantastic resource. And what we're seeing is that within the workforce, they're no longer looking for experts. Expertise is really important, but they're also looking for experts who are, to a certain extent, generalists. How are you able to engage with others? Do you have those soft skills? And so what I would then say is if you think about the future of work, engineering is not going to look the same, consulting is not going to look the same, medicine is not going to look the same in the next 10 years when a lot of kids will be done with university and looking to the workforce. What I would then recommend is thinking about what are the core skills that can be developed at this young age and how can that complement what's offered in school. I don't recommend that families add too much onto a student's plate because you're still a teenager, you're still a student, you have a lot of responsibilities. Rather, think about what are the gaps within the current school that you're attending and how can we complement it as a family to ensure that you're gaining some of the critical and essential soft and concrete skills like coding, like being able to develop a digital presence, building websites, doing things with your hands, thinking about automation, but the soft skills of thinking about automation to make a difference in society. The soft skills of presenting the ideas that you're developing in a way that connects with an audience that may be very diverse. So these are all of the things that I would say is then once you're able to identify and articulate a list of 5 different skills, whether soft or concrete skills, and then plan for the next 2 years how you'll develop it. That I believe is a great DIY approach because it allows you to reflect on what you have, what is needed for the future, and how do you develop that. And I think that is the advice that I would leave with families and students. Great. Fantastic. Well, thank you all so much for attending the webinar today. I'm hoping that I left some food for thought as you navigate the next few years of considering different universities and colleges, demonstrating interest, showing that you are intentional about the process as well, and then finally coming up with a strategy that allows you the most flexibility while at the same time having a clear direction on what it is you'd like to achieve as an outcome through the application process. So thank you all so much.